Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Leading the Way, brought to you by Driveaway. We have a really cool program today, and especially patriotic program today. As always, I am joined by Ruth, our CEO and chairman. Rod, how are you?
Very good, Kevin. Very good.
Well, I am excited, Rod, as I'm sure you are. Our special guest today is Captain Jack Becker. Jack is a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, an operational F-18 Hornet and Super Hornet pilot, also an active duty and reserve F-18 instructor pilot, basically just a badass waiting to happen. Jack, first of all, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Kevin. My pleasure, and thanks for your support. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining this. As we've talked about, this is a platform where we talk about leadership. And I think the contrast or the comparison between the military and just business is going to be a really interesting discussion. So would love to just jump in, Jack, with you and talk about, leadership from your perspective and how, your career in the military has kind of, how it's structured and maybe, how it's impacted you.
Well, thanks, Kevin. That's one of the most interesting things about my time frame in 24 years of service in the Navy. That's both active duty and as a reservist. Is I saw a big shift, as I'm sure that you guys did in the civilian sector as well, from types of leaderships. When we all grew up, it was the kind of Vince Lombardi, Newt Rockney style of beat them into submission until they all unite as a team, kind of, or the Herb Brooks mentality of getting them to unite against the coach kind of thing. And that's really shifted now into more of the leaders are showing true vulnerability, and that's bringing out trust and confidence in the subordinates. And it's kind of the antithesis of what it was when we were young. Could you imagine a leader when we were young, or one of your coaches showing vulnerability? That was like the exact opposite of what it was like.
Yeah, no. So Rod, let's jump right into that. I'd love to hear, your perspective, having been a basketball player, played for many, and then also how you manage and run the Driveaway organization. Because I think what Jack is saying is very, very relevant.
Yeah, that was a question I kind of had for Jack. What difference in the leadership style from day one as a freshman at the Naval Academy versus how it goes now. But I see that I see that in business as well. We have to sort of tailor the leadership style to who we're leading at the time. And I think that's really important, that as leaders, we need to kind of work with who we've got, because sometimes we can't choose who we have, and try to get the best out of them in different ways. And people react differently to different styles. I agree. I'm a Bobby Knight, old school. He tells you what to do. You try to figure out how you need to jump to do it. And no questions asked. And I think those days are gone. You could see that in the coaching ranks. The old school coaches in the NCAA are starting to drop out because they're not built that way. And I think to survive, and whether it's in today's military or in today's working leadership roles, you do have to adapt as a leader to who you're leading. Without compromise of your principles, but still get the most out of everybody by adapting.
Yeah. So Jack, I love it. This is so interesting because I think people probably assume that in the military, it is a one size fits all, do what I say, et cetera, et cetera. But you're saying that even the military has kind of evolved over time, over your career to a different style of leadership.
Well, flying tactical fighter jets, I think, is a unique subsect of the military. And there's certainly parts of the military, and I'm thinking just in the extreme, like infantry, where that it is still very much the Bobby Knight way of you do as I say because I'm the platoon leader, and he or she reports to the platoon commander and all that, up the chain of command. But what we've learned with the human interaction of dealing with high stress, high stakes, unforgiving environments like flying fighter jets is that what we say is there's no rank in the cockpit. My wingman and I are totally equal. And that is how you build that trust and confidence, whether somebody is a brand new green nugget, nugget's what we call a rookie, brand new green nugget, or a very experienced squadron commander. Once we both strap into the airplanes, now we're on an equal playing field. And that's where you can really build the trust that it comes out when you show that vulnerability. And I think you guys are familiar with how passionate I am about the debrief. We could dive more into that, but
Yeah.
that's really where you can show it. That helps the team get better. Because the movies didn't do us any favors showing the huge ego battles between the protagonist and antagonist in the movies of Top Gun. But really in the squadron, it's how can I help this team become even more elite? Every day we just show up to work saying, how can I make this team even more elite?
Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because, Rod and I talk about, business and leadership and, how you get people to follow and go in the right direction. But it's certainly the stakes are a little bit higher when you're strapped into a cockpit or to your point, you're on a battlefield. And, if things are not going right, then, there are casualties, literal casualties. So interesting. So Jack, I'd love to hear. So we talked a little bit about creating that culture, and there's different ways and things have kind of evolved. But how can leadership and the culture that's built, how can that drive things like innovation? How does that help drive innovation when you have built that culture?
That's a great question. I think one of the best things it does is that while we're building that trust and confidence, it gets all our teammates to show up with a more open and free sharing environment. We refer to it as a psychological security. What it means is it could be a receptionist or a custodian or an intern with their second day on the job that has this idea that might totally change this immediate team or this office or the entire industry because they had an environment that was psychologically secure enough for them to share it. One of the things I wanted to pitch to Rod was the idea that in the military, there certainly are the Bobby Knight leaders and that has to be that way. Like I said, in the infantry, it's become a little bit more of a mutual support environment between wingmen and tactical fighter jets. But now I'm thinking of, you said the old school coaches are leaving basketball. I'm thinking of like even collegiate coaches. They're saying that they have to be able to enjoy the same music as their players, right? That never happened when we were growing up. But you still have the strength and conditioning coach who's going to bust your butt. And he's not there to be touchy-feely. He doesn't want to relate to you. He's going to push you and make you stronger. So how does that parallel to you running, whether it's retail or running big organizations, Rod?
Well, that's exactly right. There's certain things, safety in our business. There's really no room for creativity, let's say, in safety. Safety is one of our pillars of our. It should be a pillar of the industry. It's definitely a pillar of auto Driveaway is safety. And we don't take shortcuts. There is no questions asked. Safety is of utmost importance. If we don't get our customers' cars from point A to point B safely, not only does that affect our customers, it also affects our drivers, which is our lifeblood is our drivers. And we want them to arrive safe so they can arrive home safely as well. Yet, we allow our offices to be a little creative and have, like you said, that psychological safety that they can make decisions about when things go to detail, when things go to service, where they can be creative because timeframes are kind of all over the place with how we move vehicles.
So Jack, the flip side of kind of that innovation and what Rod talked about, giving people the flexibility to do what they do, the kind of flip side of that, which you're very familiar with, is this idea of standardization, right? Like how important is building that consistency, whether it be in the military, and then Rod will go to you in terms of, making sure that processes are in place so that, things are being done the same way. I know for us from a business, it's important that we are consistent. We're delivering the same level of service. But Jack, I'd love to hear from the military perspective, how important that is, that you have some sort of standardization.
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. That it's what we rely on the most, I think, is keeping up that standard operating procedure. That is the gold standard. And the way that we achieve that, hopefully, is just through reps. And that's how the three of us have been successful in most things we do, right? Is just repetition and getting it down. Because there's a saying in the military is fight like you train, train like you fight. Like we want to do it the exact same way so that when things are getting totally stressful in the fog of war, we can fall back on those repetitions. We've done thousands of reps and we've done it up to the standard every single time. And one of the things the three of us have talked about in the past is combating that drift. And that is just letting our standards slide just a little. And I think the most insidious thing that happens when we do that is that we get away with it, right? We finally do take that shortcut. Nothing bad happens. So the person committing it lets that become the new normal. Little time goes by, then we drift a little more, and we drift a little more. So we have to have those processes in place, like you said, to battle drift. So what we do is we give people the authority to come up with a new way of doing business, a new process. Like Rod said, that creativity and flexibility. But before they put it into practice, if it's going to go outside the standard operating procedure, because that would be drift, they just send it up the chain. And we periodically have executive review committees that will look at that and say, gosh, that is a better way of doing business. We make that the new gold standard so that people can innovate and make their jobs better every day. So that's how we keep the standard and even raise it every time somebody comes up with a new or innovative idea.
Yeah, so Rod, talk about that. Like that's this idea of drift, military term. But like think about that or talk about that relative to our 40 offices where people are spread across the country and you don't have somebody, watching every moment. How do we combat that in our business?
The one thing that we forgot to mention about Jack is he also played football at the Naval Academy. So he got the double whammy of having football coaches, and then the difference between sports and in even the military, and Jack just said that. Then in business you don't really get to practice much. You're thrown into it. So repetition. Sports practice should be much harder than the game. Training in the military should be much harder than the actual fighting, if you will, or the actual what you train for. In business, you kind of thrown in there. We try to train. We do train our employees, but it's live. Our customers they don't care if it's your first day on the job or you're about ready to retire tomorrow. They want that car delivered. What they're paying for and what they come accustomed to with auto Driveaway. So in business, we try to maintain those standards. We have meetings with our people all the time to share the ideas. So if there is something new going on, we can introduce it to the group. And then that group can talk about it, work out the details sort of in the management side. So when we do implement it in the field, we've tried to think of all the barriers to why we can't do it. In Jack mentioned when he was at our conference, and I think he talked about it, is that brief and debrief, which I think is really important in business because you don't get to practice. So when things do, it's sort of the practice is the debriefing of what went on. So then when you do it again, you've kind of brought up all the potential pitfalls until something else happens and it adds to those pitfalls. But I think having continuous improvement meetings, these debriefs of new ideas that we've tried, is very important in business because you don't get to practice. It's live all the time, and the customers expect a certain, especially if you've established that baseline standard. It's really important that we share the ideas and then learn from those so we don't have that again. That's kind of our practice.
Yeah, so let's so you've both used the term debrief, which I was going to get to. Let's get to it now. So Jack, explain to us and our viewers, this idea of the debrief, what it is and why it's so important.
Yes, sure thing. And that full transparency, Rod said I played football at the Naval Academy. I practiced an awful lot. I just want to put that out there. I played a lot during the week, not on Saturdays. So the debrief is so vital. And that's a great point, Rod, about how in business, you're just kind of thrown right into it. And that made me just think of a lot of times our trek through flight school is a daunting, just tedious journey. It takes almost 3.5 years for us to earn our wings. And I think that was very much similar to you don't get a lot of reps. At any given point through this trek of 3.5 years, you're only 3 training missions or 3 sorties away from going home. If one goes poorly, the second one's kind of like, can we get him back on track? The third
Yeah,
one's
no,
all or
that's
nothing, or else you're out. So what we do to battle that was the pre-mission prep. How much time can you put in beforehand? And what we call it is chair flying, where we'd sit in the chair and go through that entire training mission to cover all the contingencies. What could happen here if I do that? What happens here? And you go through the entire thing in your mind hundreds of times before you actually do it. And I think that works for a sales pitch, so we can do pre-mission prep and brief as a team before we do something, because like you said, a lot of the time, especially in the operations side, it's just go do it. And then again, Rod brought it up, that idea of the debrief is so powerful, because that is truly why we can repeat our successes and stop repeating failures. What I've seen in my almost 700 clients is far too often other priorities went out, and then these invaluable lessons learned are then lost forever. And so when we're using terms like standard and debrief, when you have 40 offices across the country, we want to make sure they're all learning from each other. So if someone in one office makes a great call, we want that information disseminated among 39 other offices, so they're all doing the great things. And somebody makes a mistake in one of those, we have to have the culture where it's okay to debrief it, share that information amongst all the offices, because the worst thing that happens is not that that mistake happened here today, it's that it happens in a different office again tomorrow. So debriefing is so powerful in that regard. I truly think it's what has made U.S. fighter pilots the best in the world at what we do, is because we opened up this transparency when we debriefed, saying, how can I make this team better?
Rod, I'm going to flip to you a little bit, and then I'll go back to Jack. But, how have you each kind of evolved as a leader?
I do a fair share of listening as well. And I think over the course of my career, listening to others, trying to hear what they're saying and how they're saying it so we can improve our process is really important. One of the things I back to sort of the debrief a little bit, we do a coffee with the CEO every Tuesday with all the new people in our organization. And we get online like this because we're all over the country. We can't do that. And I tell them they're not expected to know all the answers. What they're expected to do is ask questions and try to find out who knows the answer, because we have plenty of experience in our organization. We have people that have been here 20, 25 years, and there may be things that they haven't seen, but I doubt it. And search those people out, because they may have the answer. So listening over the course of my career has really helped mold my idea of what success is and how to achieve it with the people that are already, like I said, most people in an organization can do the work. They just need the right tools, the right training, and a little motivation can help. You see this a lot when new coaches come in, and they turn over the team a little bit, but they bring a different attitude towards things, and they normally increase their wins. And it's just because of a refreshed idea, and maybe they allowed people to do what they do best instead of stifle to a certain program. So I think listening is a big thing in leadership. Like they say, you've got one mouth and two ears. So it's good to open those two ears up quite a bit, and that happens the farther you get into your leadership tenure. Is you do a lot more listening, I think.
Yeah. So Jack, I'd love to hear your perspective on that. Maybe specifically from the perspective of, when you were, and you still are, a pilot, but then to an instructor, now you're leading or you're instructing younger pilots. How did you evolve, or what did you learn through that process?
Well, I love Rod's use of the word listen, because one of the weird challenges we have as a Naval Academy graduate, first you go through this 3.5 years of flight school, and that your only job in the entire Navy is learn how to fly a tactical fighter jet. That's your job. Then you get assigned to a squadron, and now you're a division officer with a pretty serious leadership role, having no training in leadership the past 3.5 years. They've just been studying flight manuals and tactics and things like that. And I work directly with a chief petty officer, and he or she has usually 25 years in the Navy experience. They know everything about how the Navy works. And they're helping me run this quality assurance office or whatever the division office I'm in charge of in the squadron. I have 0 days experience, and yet I'm in charge of this chief petty officer who has 25 years experience and knows everything. And the awkward dynamic is then he has to call me sir. And every morning he has to salute me. So it's this weird dynamic where, like, you're going to do what the chief says because they know everything, but it's ultimately up to you. So you do a lot of listening to the chief. And then you kind of evolve. And when you finally get some experience there and the chief starts to respect you a little bit more than the day zero idiot as you show up, because that's really what it's
Right.
like. Then you can tell when the chief says, like, what do you think, sir? And you're like, wow, hasn't asked me that ever. This is becoming pretty good. So there's a lot of listening at the start, but it then evolves because you're using the whole chain of command. We have our department heads and the commanding officers, and we take as much as we do bad leadership, saying, I don't want to be like that person. I do want to do like that. So you're constantly just putting tools in your toolbox. And I think that as an instructor pilot, you learn the most in the debrief there too. And I even learned every flight from my students when they would do something. I'm pointing out everything that they messed up and need to do better, but I would see them do something good. And again, I'm just stealing those tricks and putting those in my toolbox. I'd like to share with you guys one thing, if I may, that I don't think I had the chance to do this at your conference, but it's a very powerful, just kind of a motivational tool. And having seen me speak for a 60-minute keynote, you guys might say that I'm a motivational tool. But
Absolutely.
my
Yeah.
commanding officer, I was brand new to the squadron, 14 pilots all around a conference table. And the commanding officer said, I'm going to do a hypothetical exercise with you guys, but I want you to hang with me. He said, I get a call in the middle of the night from the duty officer. We lost an airplane. Pilot did not eject. It's a fatality. He said, I'm going to ask, who was it? And before the duty officer can tell me a name, he goes, I got 1 or 2 names pop in my head. And he looked directly at me as the newest pilot in the squadron. He said, Jack, you think you're my first guess? And of course, I sat up straight in my chair. I'm like, no, sir, I'm not the shortcut guy. Not me. And then he went to Mordo next to me. Mordo, you think you're my first guest? And then Sable and all the way around the table. Of course, everybody says no. And when he finally got to all the pilots, he said, well, I love the confidence, but I still want you guys to know that if we suffer something bad, I still get 1 or 2 names jumping in my head. So what are you doing every morning when you show up to work to not be my first guess when something happens? That's pretty powerful.
We talked a lot about leaders that you guys have been exposed to. For both of you, what are the we talked about listening is a key quality. Are there other key qualities that you've seen successful leaders possess, and then maybe as a follow-up to that, any advice you would have for, younger leaders in business or the military, et cetera? But I'd love to start with, what are those key qualities, in addition to being a good listener, that you see, that you have seen in leaders that you think are successful? Jack, I'll start with you.
I think the number one thing that I saw and hopefully try and emulate is the ability to admit your mistakes.
Sure.
Because we're all making them. And I think some of my clients ask me, I don't know how to build more trust in my team. I'm like, admit more of your mistakes if you want to build that trust, because your team knows you're making them. And if you're not sharing it, if you're just sweeping those things under the rug, now that's where we start to break down the trust and confidence in our teammates. So I think the best thing that I've tried to emulate in good leaders is admitting mistakes, and then getting our people to do the same thing. And that just goes back into the entire system that I'm such a proponent of, and debriefing, and then making the team better. And then you admit more mistakes and they trust more. And one of the most exciting things that I've seen happen, and hopefully is happening within your organization too, is that as time moves on, after we start implementing these debriefs, is that all the big mistakes that we're suffering are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We've already taken care of all the big stuff. And now it's just little minutia things we're talking. But I think the best thing we can do, and my advice to new leaders, is admit your mistakes to your subordinates. And that's going to make them know it's okay. And they'll start doing the same thing. And then they trust you more.
I mean, very key. It shows that you're human. It shows that you care about what goes on. The other thing is that it is, take responsibility for things that go wrong. I think right, wrong, or indifferent, I get all the blame and everybody else gets all the credit. That's how I treat it. And and because there's always something, there may be something that I could have done to avoid even the person out in the field's mistake. Maybe we need to provide more training. Maybe I need to agree to a new process that maybe I didn't. So, take responsibility for the actions of the company or the actions of your squadron or the actions of your division. And then, hey, when you're wrong, you're wrong. It is what it is, and it does show the vulnerability and the fact that you're in this with them, and they, you're right alongside with what they do, and you understand their plight in this business that we call auto driveaway. So
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting. And again, as we talked about up top, not a conversation we would have had 30 years ago, because the expectation was that the coach, the leader, well, they had all the answers. They know everything. But I think now we're in an environment or a society where it's okay that you don't know. And we're looking for leaders to help get us there. But I think you both use the words vulnerable and transparent communication. I think those are so key to motivating people, because they don't expect you to know everything.
One thing I'll add to that is that I love the coffee with a CEO idea, especially spread across the country. But having our people know that the most junior, the most inexperienced person on the team, we need them to succeed for the entire organization to succeed. It's not just Rod that has to have a great week this week. It's every employee there. So we all succeed when every single one of us succeeds. And it kind of takes the egos out of the equation, that no one person is more important than the other kind of thing. And then we all celebrate a team success. I think that's very powerful.
Oh yeah, it's kind of one of the things that I tell them, and right, wrong, or indifferent, we don't worry really about our competition. And we really don't worry about the end result. If we do the right process, we do what we're supposed to do, we will be ahead of the competition, and our customers will get what they pay for. And our people in our organization are the most important thing we have. You can buy technology, you can create technology, but the drive and the desire to succeed needs to be instilled in your group. And that is the most powerful thing we have at Auto Driveaway, is our people and the willingness to do what it takes to get the job done. And you provide the training, you provide the resources for them to be successful, and the support behind that. And good things happen. Good things happen.
I love that even, Rod, this is the first client I've had in 700, I think, that when I ask on the pre-event call as I'm setting up my keynote for your conference, I said, who's the biggest competitor? And they said, nope, we're just focusing on being better than we were yesterday. You're competing against what your version of yourself was yesterday. And that is such a great outlook. I love that.
Yeah, no, what a great, I'm going to wrap us there, because I think that is such a high note to finish on. Jack, thank you so much for joining us and your ongoing partnership. Rod, thanks as always. Really thought this was fantastic and just such an interesting conversation, correlating auto drive-away business, the military, et cetera. So thank you both again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jack.